I work in a company called CSG, and so my team is responsible for the operations and support of online software. So like Julie spoke earlier, I too started out in accounting and was clearly too cool for that. So what's the next coolest thing but software development and IT? But that's where I've been ever since. So a lot of the responsibility that my team has is part of our software is to consume data, to have our subscribers come online and be able to sign up and register at different customer sites. So we're taking personally identifiable information, or PII. Some of you may be familiar with that. The other thing we're doing is taking credit card information. So our responsibility to our customers is absolutely to ensure that we are taking careful care of their data and acting as what we call data custodians. So some of the things that I'm going to talk about are the responsibility of what we need to do to identify the different types of threats. So particularly as customers are moving on to different platforms, the different systems that are now in place that we're working through, not only from a financial institution perspective, but certainly from a trading perspective. There's different types of threats that you'll need to be aware of. Now, I'm sure within this room, as you guys are starting out with your careers, you may be at the front of, the actual trading transactions. Maybe some of you are in IT, right, and working with a lot of these systems. Maybe some of you are really customer focused. It doesn't matter. What we're going to talk about is really identifying what those threats are and talking about the remediation. So Larry brought up some really great points, which is act decisively and be able to really bring to your manager's attention anything that may have occurred that you deem as suspicious or really unethical, right? We'll talk a little bit about that. And then what is your responsibility? So what are the types of things that you can do as custodians of data, regardless of the role that you're playing right now, the role that you may have in the future, and what are the things that you need to be looking out for and how to help combat a lot of these things? So raise of hands, who here has been the victim or knows someone who's been the victim of identity theft? Anybody? Super fun, right? So I was personally impacted by this as well. When I found out that I was a victim when I got a phone call from Hertz asking me why I didn't return the BMW that I rented in Orlando, Florida, as I was taking the call from my office in Chicago. So a lot of that, right, is all focused on the fact that there was a security breach through some site where my information was entered. Somehow that data was not stored properly, and I didn't have the right data custodians taking proper care of it. So something like identity theft is terrible, right? Because it's not only disruptive by having to go and manage a lot of getting your life back together, but can absolutely affect things like credit. So if you want to own a home or buy a car or rent from Hertz ever again, it can be pretty devastating. So again, it all comes back to security. So walking through a few of the examples of the threats that we have, carding is an example of where a customer or a list of cards will be available on the dark web. And these are all, again, retrieved from these breaches. And those cards will be made available to where a bot has some, or a programmer has some program that will go in and attempt to use the cards and put in the proper CVV and all of the information. When they get a hit that's successful that authorizes and captures the purchase, they'll be able to take that card then and flag it to be sold again on the dark web, or even do things like make a bunch of prepaid purchases that they can then sell for cash. So again, these are all things that have been able to be retrieved from different breaches. Larry talked a little bit about spoofing, right? So when you actually have that on the trading floor, spoofing in this case is really the act of impersonating something from a front-end perspective. So it might be you're coming in from a particular IP, you're logging in from a particular device onto a system, and you're able to impersonate perhaps a user where you can come in and get access to really key information that you can take away and do some damage with it. One of the things that we're currently battling is a little fun thing called credential stuffing. So once again, there is this data file that is terabytes and terabytes of credentials information, so username and passwords. And these passwords then are attempted to be used on regular sites. Doesn't matter, anywhere that is asking for a username and password. And what they'll be able to do is try to use the username and password combination, and assuming that people never change their passwords across websites, please tell me none of you do this, that they will actually find a hit. And once they find a hit, they will be able to say, okay, well, Lori Kevin at Gmail has the password Lori Kevin, So I'm going to go now try to use that, and that was successful on this Formula One website. Now I'm going to go pull that out, and I'm going to go check on Chase or Bank of America or a trading site, and that's where the real damage can happen. So that's been a good one for us to try to figure out the next few things, which is how do we get visibility into this? What are the types of monitoring tools that can be put in place? And again, this will be likely something that some of you may experience as you may be helping from either a customer awareness perspective or from an IT and monitoring side. How can we make these things visible? And then what do we do when we do make them visible? How do we remediate? What are ways in which we can quickly combat these types of things? How do we identify all of these bots that are now all over the place, able to just continue to hack into the system on these various types of security threats? And once they're in, what can we do to shut them down? So for example, a lot of the things that we're having to do, in this case, we call it a little bit of whack-a-mole, where we can identify an IP that's coming in that's performing one of these security threats, and we'll identify it and block it. But we're continuing to have to try to battle to figure out how we stay ahead of them. There's a lot of software that's out there now that you can use to put on an outer layer to ensure that you can block this traffic before it can do much damage. And awareness is a huge one. So I kind of want to get into some of the security considerations then, that as you move throughout your careers, no matter what roles you play, no matter if you're customer facing, if you're back end, if you're working from the financial perspective, security is a responsibility of every single person within an organization. So the big thing first is identifying and knowing what the policies and procedures are. Typically, this is going to be managed by a security team that's within each organization, but there is awareness that is expected from all employees to understand what those security policies and procedures are, where to find them, and to make sure that you know enough to be dangerous about what they mean. Access controls are huge. So in my organization, what we do is we look at each role within the company, and we use something called lowest level job permissions. What this ensures is that we don't give someone access to production right out of the gate, or we only give someone access to the database as long as they also don't have access to the code, right? So we want to make sure that there's only the responsibilities that they are intended to have, and we partition their security rights and restrictions based on the job role. Always having a secure network is a huge one, right? So there's a lot of things that we can start to do to make sure that we have the proper firewalls in place. This is, again, going to be mostly on the corporate IT and things of that nature, but ensuring that there's a secure network is definitely a way to thwart these attacks. Identity management is an interesting one. So you may already have, as you log on to personal websites and things of that nature, or accessing maybe Outlook or something like that, something called multi-factor authentication. So there's a lot of new things out there that can really help to make sure that you can use voice recognition or thumbprint or facial recognition. So there's a lot of the things that you can implement from an identity management perspective to confirm that you are the person that's supposed to be accessing that account or that particular infrastructure. Antivirus is a pretty basic one. That's something that runs on probably a lot, I hope, of your home computers. It's definitely something that's run in a lot of the data centers. When we talk about security too, the movement into the cloud is a huge migration and brings on an added layer of complexity. So a lot of considerations around security when you start to go and think about everything now accessible via the cloud, and you have to make sure there's the proper controls there, and one of those things is certainly antivirus. Change approvals is a big one too. So when you think about taking an iOS update on your phone, or if you have ever gone to your bank and they're saying, hey, we're down for maintenance, all of those changes that get pushed through into a system and onto a platform, it's extremely, extremely important that there are proper change approvals so that there is no collusion for someone who may implement a program that can go and scrape a little bit off of every financial transaction. There's code reviews that happen from a development perspective to ensure that people are aware of the changes that are going through, and that, again, those responsibilities are in the hands of people who know whether something should be approved. That could be from a development perspective and code, but it could also be for, let's say, any changes that you are authorized to make on behalf of your customers. Protected data is a big one. So a lot of these breaches happen because the malicious activity happens to where they can go in, they get access into the data, and they're able to pull it out. and certainly shouldn't be a problem, except for the fact that, guess what? All of your information is in the clear. So the driver's license that I had that was able to be obtained that led to my identity theft was kept in the clear. There was no encryption. There was no data storage. There probably wasn't a lot of those different responsibilities that should have been in place that caused that breach. So protected data really means making sure that the data is protected at rest, meaning when it's actually being stored somewhere, but also in transmission. So if I'm entering in my login and my password, that is going to be sent off to some place in the cloud, and while in transmission, we want to make sure that it is also protected securely. Incident response is a big one. So from an incident response perspective, this means exactly what Larry kind of talked about, right? Which is those 5 rules he just gave. When you identify it, make sure you start to escalate it. And so the incident response is really anytime you can identify that something may have happened. Typically, companies will have very, very specific policies about what happens next. So there's probably legal that has to get involved. It can be a huge, huge liability, and there's typically steps in each organization about the proper response to an incident. Unique IDs and logging. So as you came on and kind of got your credentials or were able to log on to the network, everybody got a unique ID. So you're not sharing passwords, you're not sharing information, and that allows the logging to occur, and again, Larry spoke about this a little bit too, to make sure that if you are logged on and providing some sort of a transaction on behalf of a customer, everybody knows that they can go through and look at the audit to show that that transaction was completed by you. This helps to prevent any sort of unethical activities or any type of other malicious behavior. And then lastly, training and awareness. So most companies and most platforms will always have training, security training. So from my company, for example, as new employees come on to work with us, they'll have that security training at the beginning. There's specialized training for customer service folks, for developers, for management, and then it's expected to have that training each and every year. So that's definitely something that you should participate in. Security may not be the hottest thing, but is definitely something that there does need to be that awareness and make sure that security is the responsibility of everyone. And rather than have it be a part of the culture, it really needs to be a permanent fixture within your environment. So I hope that gives you a little bit of insight into kind of the challenges that are absolutely at play here in the digital world. I wish you the best of luck, and hopefully make sure you change your passwords frequently. Thank you.
We read dozens of news sources, so you only have to read one. John Lothian News.